Welcome back. So we're going to talk about the types of decisions that you can make when you're talking about your hypothesis tests. So when you perform a hypothesis, you can make one of two decisions. You can reject the null hypothesis, or you can fail to reject the null hypothesis. So there are two types of errors that can happen when it comes to rejecting or not rejecting, failing to reject. You can have a type 1 error, which is when occurs if the null hypothesis is rejected when it is true. So when you prove that something is true and that you reject it anyway. And there's a type 2 error, can't spell, occurs if the null hypothesis is rejected when it is not rejected when it is false. So you say it's true, but it's not. So there's the two types of errors. So identifying type 1 and type 2 errors. The USDA limit for salmonella contamination for chicken is 20%. So that's going to be important. A meat inspector reports that the chicken produced by a company exceeds the USDA limit. You perform a hypothesis test to determine whether the meat inspector's claim is true. When will a type 1 error or type 2 error occur? Which is more serious? So first of all, let's write what our two are. So it said the USDA limit for salmonella contamination is 20%. So we know that it can't exceed 20%. So it has to be less than or equal to 0.20. And then our opposite would be greater than 0.20. So a type 1 error would occur if HO, so the null hypothesis, is rejected and the actual amount of chicken is less than 20%. So take a second and think about that. If you have a type 1 error and they rejected it even though the contaminated chicken is less than 20%, then our null hypothesis would be true. So a type 2 error would occur if HO is not rejected but the actual proportion of contaminated chicken I can't spell, is above 20%. So now take a second and decide which of these you think is worse. Like, think about which error would be totally bad. So I want you to, in the question that I'm about to pose, answer that question. Which one do you think, which type of error is worse in this case? All right? Then we'll try the next one. So in my personal opinion, I think a type 2 error would definitely be worse because if your amount of contaminated chicken is above 20%, you're going to be getting a lot of people salmonella, and that's not good. Salmonella stinks. All right, so I want you guys to try this one real quick. I want you to tell me what the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, and then I want you to tell me what the two types of errors are and which one you think is worse. All right? So, a company specializing in parachute assembly states that its main parachute failure rate is not more than 1%. You perform a hypothesis test to determine whether the company's claim is false. When will a type 1 error occur, and when will a type 2 error occur, and which is more serious? So, we got to figure out our null hypothesis and our alternative hypothesis. So it says that the failure rate is not more than 1. So we would have probability of less than or equal to 0.01. Make sure you move that decimal place twice, otherwise you're talking about 10%. And then our alternative probability, our alternative hypothesis would be P is greater than 0.01. So a type 1 error would be rejecting the null hypothesis when the actual proportion is less than 1% for parachute failures. Type 2 error would be failing to reject the null hypothesis when the actual proportion of parachute failures is greater than 1%. So now take a second and think about which would be worse. Rejecting it when the actual proportion is less than 1%, or failing to reject it when it's greater than. Again, type 2 error would definitely be worse because you would have more than 1% failure, which would probably hurt a lot more people. All right, new video coming soon.